welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 54. And we are starting out this week with Raging River, and this is one that I mentioned in my Crazy Red Enchantments video that I just thought was wacky and wild. But after I did that video, I kind of realized it's actually a pretty good card. There's just a whole lot of words, and it's a lot of wacky stuff going on, so that sort of complicates things a little. Red and a red enchantment. Whenever one or more creatures you control attack, each defending player divides all creatures without flying they control into a left pile and a right pile. Then for each creature you control, choose left or right. That creature can't be blocked this combat except for creatures with flying and creatures in a pile with the chosen label. So that's really complicated and there's a whole lot going on there, but let's simplify it a little, okay? Let's simplify it so that people can understand really what's going on here. Let's pretend I'm attacking one person, all right? So I'm only attacking one opponent, which is typically what you're going to do in a game anyway. And let's pretend there's no flying creatures involved here. Again, just to simplify. So I got a bunch of ground creatures. Say I got 4. I'm attacking my opponent. Let's say they got 4 ground creatures. That opponent is going to divide all creatures they control into a left pile and a right pile. Then for each attacking creature I control, I pick one of those piles that only those creatures can block. I mean, essentially what this does is it just divides the amount of creatures your opponent can block with in half, you know? And if your opponent has like a creature with death touch, whatever pile they put it in, you'll pick the other pile, right? Because you don't want your creatures to die. You get the final decision after the piles are made. So this is all upside you. This is actually a really good card, I think, if you're in a deck where you're probably going to be attacking a lot. But coming in at number 2 this week is Reign of Filth. 1 black mana instant. Until end of turn, land you control gain. Sacrifice this land to add a black. So just another great black ritual effect. And of course, the trick here is you can tap your lands for mana and then sacrifice them, right? So essentially you're getting double the mana. I mean, even if you're not in a land sacrifice theme. I mean, this is fantastic in a Gitrog deck, obviously, or in any deck where you want to be sacrificing your lands. But even if you're not in that theme, you know, let's say I have 6 lands out and my commander's pretty expensive. It costs 8. And I don't have the 8. I only have 6, obviously. I tap 1 land to cast this. Then the other 5 lands I tap for mana. Now I have a total of 5 mana and I can now sacrifice 3 lands. And now I have a total of 8 mana and I can cast my commander. It's a little bit of a desperation play, but it is going to ensure that you can do what you want. And then, of course, if you have that huge blowout, you like that Torment of Hailfire Exsanguinate play, you don't even care, right? Because the game's just over anyway. You'll just sacrifice all your lands, pray that your opponents don't have a counter spell, and just win the game, right? So it's also good there as well. Just another great ritual option if you're looking for one. Coming in at number 3, Rakshasa Vizier. 2 black, green, and a blue. Cat Demon, 4/4. Whenever one or more cards are put into exile from your graveyard, put that many +1/+1 counters on Rakshasa Vizier. So obviously this card was made to work with Delve, right? And if maybe you got a Tasigur deck, I think this is a great fit in there. Just free value because you're going to be exiling stuff from your graveyard anyway. If you're in any deck, in Sultai colors, obviously, where you're going to be exiling stuff from your graveyard all the time for whatever strategy you're doing, this is a great fit. But where I think this card is particularly good is in a graveyard theme. And the reason why is because it's sort of pseudo graveyard protection, right? So if you're in that Sidisi deck where you're going to be milling yourself a lot and you probably want stuff in your graveyard, or more importantly, in that Muldrotha deck where you definitely want stuff in your graveyard, how are your opponents going to beat you? Well, they're going to beat you with a Bajukabog, right? Or some effect that is exiling your graveyard. So I see this as not necessarily protection, but payoff for having my graveyard exiled. So if I'm in that Muldrotha deck, I have my Rakshasa Vizier in play, and my opponent plays the Bajukabog, exiles my entire graveyard, that sucks. But when one or more cards is put into exile from your graveyard, put that many +1/+1 counters, right? So if my entire graveyard gets exiled, say it's 30 cards, I'm now putting that many +1/+1 counters on my Rakshasa Vizier. So now I have a 34/34 creature. That's a pretty good consolation prize for having my entire graveyard exiled. Also will sort of be a deterrent a little bit. You know, I think your opponent might still exile your graveyard if you're playing that Muldrotha deck, but is a little bit of a deterrent where your opponents are like, okay, well, I don't want to get one-shotted, so maybe I won't exile their graveyard. So I think it's a great fit in a graveyard deck in Sultai colors. Coming in at number 4 is another one of those cards that probably a lot of people aren't going to love seeing, but I like to give these unique cards a mention, and it's Razia's Purification, 4 red and a white sorcery. Each player chooses 3 permanents they control, then sacrifices the rest. So that's pretty rough. I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't want to see this card in a casual Commander game. You know, I've sort of turned around a little bit on cards like this. Cataclysm is another one infamously that is very similar. I know it doesn't seem fun, but I think it kind of makes the game interesting, you know, and it's not necessarily going to be all upside for the guy casting this. I mean, if you got a Vorinclex in play and your opponent plays Razia's Purification, well, you're just going to keep your Vorinclex and a couple of lands and you're good to go, right? This is actually a really hard card to play. Each player gets to choose 3 permanents of their choice. So you really have to be careful with how you play this card, and I think it could end up screwing you if you do it incorrectly. I mean, if you have, say, a Voltron creature, which a lot of people will do with an Armageddon, right? They have their big Voltron creature with lots of auras and equipments on it, and then they cast Armageddon because they can close out the game. That doesn't really work with Razor's Purification because you have to choose 3 permanents. So you can't keep all those auras and equipment on your commander. You can only keep your commander +2, and then you have to sacrifice all your lands as well. And maybe your opponent has a removal spell. Now you're screwed. Or maybe they got a ghostly prison and you can't pay to attack them, right? So this actually is pretty complicated in how you're going to make it work. And I like that it's going to make every player put a lot of thought into what they're actually going to keep depending on what the other opponents have. I think it could actually be interesting in a Commander game. Coming in at number 5 is a really interesting card for a Commander game, Realm Razer. 3 red, green, white, beast, 4/2, and has one of the most powerful abilities you will ever see on a creature. When Realm Razer enters the battlefield, exile all lands. That's right. How many people out there knew there was a creature that when it ETB'd, it exiled all lands? However, of course, when it leaves the battlefield, you return all the exiled cards to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control. So this is just such a ridiculously powerful ability, and there's so many ways you can go with it that you could build your entire deck around this card, right? Exiling all lands is obviously incredibly powerful, but also having them all come back into play, right? If you're in a landfall deck, you sacrifice your Realm Razer, just as an example, and it turns into like a scape shift, right? You're getting a whole bunch of landfall triggers all at once. So there is a couple of things going on here, right? You're doing the I exile everyone's lands thing, but you're also doing the a whole ton of lands are coming into play all at the same time when my Realm Razer leaves the battlefield. This is really the only card in the game that is doing that. Being able to essentially blink all lands in play, that on its own is a incredibly powerful ability. So are there decks out there where this could actually fit? I mean, if you're in a Naya landfall deck, you could just play your Realm Razer and guaranteed your opponents are going to want to get it off the table right away so they can get their lands back. And you're okay with that because you want to get your lands back and get all those landfall triggers as well. It might work there, but really just such a powerful ability that I think you could build your entire deck around this card. Coming in at number 6, again, another really powerful ability stapled on a card, Recycle, 4 green, green enchantment. Skip your draw step. Whenever you play a card, draw a card. Oh boy, but your maximum hand size is 2. So 6-mana enchantment, that's not cheap, but this is the kind of card that you don't want it to be cheap, right? You don't want to play this card turn 1. You want to sort of do some setup, I think, before you slam this down because it is a huge commitment. You're skipping your draw step. That's not great. Your maximum hand size is 2, also not great. Could this be a good fit in a Damia deck? Possibly. You're skipping your draw step anyway, so obviously that part doesn't hurt you. Your maximum hand size being 2, I think also doesn't hurt you because you're going to draw 7 cards anyway on your upkeep. So if you happen to discard a bunch of stuff on your cleanup, not really going to hurt you that much because you can just keep like a counter spell and a removal spell, and then on your upkeep, you'll just refill your hand again so you can do a bunch of stuff. But obviously the part here that is incredibly powerful is whenever you play a card, draw a card, and play means anything, right? That means even land. So if you play a land, you draw a card. That's really important, right? That is a really important part of the text here. Just casting a spell draws you a card, right? As soon as it ends up on the stack, you get to draw. It will trigger this. Even if your opponent counters it, it doesn't matter. Obviously that spell won't resolve, but you still get the draw trigger. And of course, if you're in a graveyard theme, you're going to draw a ton of cards, and then on your cleanup step, you'll keep the couple of cards that you want in your hand, and then the rest you probably want in your graveyard, so you're totally okay with discarding them. So I really think this card could go go in a few decks. It's a little risky, but could actually work out great for you. Coming in at number 7 is Reincarnation. 1 green instant. Choose target creature. When that creature dies this turn, return a creature card from its owner's graveyard to the battlefield under the control of that creature's owner. So this is a green recursion spell. Essentially, it is very unique. It's a really old card, but was reprinted in Commander 2013 and really didn't see that much play. Really doesn't see any play at all. I haven't seen this card in forever. If you're in a theme where you have creatures dying all the time and you know they're going to be dying, it can be great there. I mean, the wording here is interesting. You're choosing target creature. When that creature dies, you're going to return a creature card from its owner's graveyard. So you can use this on your opponents. You're not going to want to though, right? Unless you want to do your opponents a favor, you can do it in a political way. This is mostly just for you. This can just be a straight up slingshot effect, right? So if you have your commander in play, someone's about to kill it, you can respond, pay 3 mana, and when that creature dies, you get to return a creature from its owner's graveyard to the battlefield. So it can be the same creature, right? You can just slingshot the same creature back into play. But of course, the best way to do this is I have a giant creature in my graveyard like a Vorinclex. I have a Sakura Tribe Elder in play. I cast this choosing my Sakura Tribe Elder. Then I sacrifice it to go get a land. And when it dies, I put my Vorinclex directly onto the battlefield, right? That's the best way to use this card. And of course, I think there's a whole lot of decks out there that are doing stuff like that. So I'm really surprised this card doesn't see more play. Coming in at number 8 is Reknit. Another card that I think is pretty unique in what it's doing. And I'm surprised I've never seen it in a Commander game before. 1 in a hybrid green and white mana instant. Regenerate target permanent. That's it. Just regenerate target permanent. So regenerate, for those who don't know how it works, is, if something's about to take lethal damage or get destroyed, you can regenerate it, and regenerate will wipe away all the damage. And then if it's a creature, and I guess if it's a permanent, it becomes tapped after it regenerates. I honestly don't even know if there's another card out there that actually regenerates a permanent. I mean, this can save any permanent. Now we do have Blacksmith Skill and now Tamiyo Safekeeping, which are white and green, are probably better options than this and are only 1 mana. However, this is a very interesting, unique option. You can regenerate any permanent with it. You can regenerate an enchantment, a land. Somebody wants to strip mine your Gaia's Cradle, you can, in response, regenerate that permanent and it won't go anywhere. So I think this card is very unique in what it's doing. And if you're in that situation where you have a particular permanent or a couple that are really, really important to your deck and you don't want them destroyed, you probably want a few different options for protecting them. Coming in at number 9 is Reign of Chaos. 2 red sorcery. Choose 1. Destroy target plains and target white creature, or destroy target island and target blue creature. So again, another color specific card. And this is again one that I think you could probably throw in particular in your mono red deck, maybe even in your Gruul deck, because it's giving you the 2 options and it is entirely unlikely that you're going to play a commander game where no one is playing white or blue. Highly unlikely. And 4 mana to destroy a land and a creature is pretty darn good, right? If you're meeting the requirements there. And red doesn't actually just straight up destroy creatures a lot, right? I talked about this with Aftershock. That's why I particularly like that card. Red does kill creatures very good, but in a damage way. Actually just straight up destroying a creature, red is very limited in that. And this is another option for you for just straight up destroying a creature. But coming in at number 10 this week is Reign of the Pit. 4 black sorcery. Each player sacrifices a creature. Create an XX black demon creature token with flying, where X is the total power of the creature sacrificed this way. And I totally forgot about this card. I saw it a little bit when I first started playing Commander. I put it into one of my decks, used it to great effect. And then when I took that deck apart, I just sort of forgot about it. And when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, that card's actually really good. And I just never see it in Commander games. I mean, 6 mana is a lot, but each player sacrificing a creature, that includes you, by the way. So that can be a bad thing, but you're going to plan around it. Just causing every player to sacrifice a creature for 6 mana obviously isn't great, but getting a demon token with flying, where X is the total power of creatures sacrificed this way, is bananas. I mean, I suppose there is the possibility that all your opponents sacrifice a 1/1, but you're just not going to cast this spell, right? You're going to wait for the right moment to cast this, where it's going to be an absolute blowout. Just like with any spell, you're going to wait until you have a couple of opponents and maybe even yourself that have a big creature to sacrifice. So when you do, you end up with like a 12/12 or a 15/15 flying demon token. So I think this card is pretty darn good, especially if you're in one of those sacrifice themes where it'll just slot in nicely anyway. But that is it for today. That is 10 more cards you should be putting in your commander decks. And if you are thinking of purchasing any of these cards, I have a TCG Player link. It is in the description below. Please give it a click. It helps support the channel. But that is it for today. And thanks for tuning in.